Hello there, and I would like to talk about this tier list I made, and hopefully this can be of help to you. So, this tier list is made for people who are interested, see someone on banner, or if they just are interested in a unit, or the units that are available in Anime Adventures. Now, unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's not letting me add more units. I think it's full. But the 19, there are a few 19.0 units in here, but in general, none of the 19.0 units are that bad. All of them would be tier 2 or above. The secret obviously would be in meta. Dreamer, I think, would be top of tier 2. Freerin would be top of tier 2. Honey would be bottom of tier 2. Um, as Honey requires you to build around her, because if you don't have a lot of multi-hit or full AoE, she's going to struggle a lot. But if you're letting her just kill boss monsters and such, then she will have an easier time and will be very useful on your team. Um, Siren obviously is very strong, being a very nice slow unit. She might make her way up to meta eventually, but right now I would put her at top of tier 2, similar to Jiraiya. Um, so in general, meta and giga meta, these are the units that people build their team around and are very strong. Tier 2, these are very strong units, but not as good. They can still be used for basically every content, but you might, have a little more difficulty. Forcible. These are units that are still very usable. They're not amazing. By no means they're amazing. But you still use them for most content, and you shouldn't run into too many problems. Obviously, you might still have to be a little more careful, have a slightly better team optimization and such, but they definitely can still get you there. Below that, these are units that aren't very good. The with unique category, these aren't very good. And same thing with forcible. A lot of these units, you will have to use them in specific teams. Um, like for instance Buggy or Bombiette or Rios. These are all here because they turn into AoE. However, it's need specific teams. It's really only there if you really need that AoE. Rios and Bombiette start as hill units, so that's why they're even higher and they go way further. Um, but most of these are still usable if you have them in the right team. All these are usable if you have them in the right team, whereas with Unique, these are rough units where even with Unique, they become just good units. Um, Even in most content, you might have difficulties with these guys if you get Unique on them. Beyond that, these are units that you might be able to use if you get Unique on them for like your daily infinite, but they're still not very good. Um, and too much work, these are units that are even on the right team, they might feel like a super niche role. Like these two, they're hill units that bleed. So with Stain, that can be useful if you need that, but otherwise they're not that powerful. Um, and to help break this down a little more, I quickly labeled each of the units in the forcible and above tier on how much they want you to build them. So one, these are units that are your main DPSs, and you want to put traits, stat rerolls, all that stuff on these units, and you want to focus on building them first as they're going to be doing the primary bits of your damage. Two, these are your like sub DPSs. These are units that are there because they do more than just DPS. However, they do DPS. So this is stuff like Chuyo or Dazai. They're pretty decent DPSs, but Chuyo is just a hill unit. He's a very powerful hill unit, but in story stages and stuff, you need hill units. So he's one of the best for that. And because of that, he's a 2. Because you care more about his role as a hill than him just being the god DPS. Same thing with Azushi. He's a really good bleed unit, not the best bleed unit, but he's really great on all sorts of teams. Like you just run him when you need a bleed unit. And because of that, he's a 2. You can definitely build damage on him, and he'll definitely show it. But yeah. And then 3 are like your supports that do damage too. Um, like Leafa. She has like I think it's like 40k damage stats. Like she can do a decent bit of damage, but you don't really want to build for that. Griffith only really does damage in like infinite leaderboard runs. You're almost never going to use Black Griffith. And then there's 4, which are like pure supports. Don't really worry about building damage ever on them. So like Amelia, for instance, or Oshi. And there are some notable exceptions to this, but in general, that's how this will go. So, to quickly call out a few that might trip you up, if you don't know, Gas and Haze have poison. So these are really only usable if you're playing by yourself or on things like Infinite Castle, which of course is solo content, because you need them to hit someone and then for the ticks of poison to last like 20 seconds or something, which is not very common to happen, especially if you're playing with other players. So in those scenarios where you're playing with other players, they become like a 3 or a 4. But if you're playing by yourself or need someone for Infinite Castle or something, then this can be a 2, as they can be very strong in those situations. Also, Nami, she's a gold unit. Don't overthink it. Yoshino, Charmy, and Mochi, these are all units that can fill in the role of Amelia if you put in a little more work into building them, and they can do it better actually, because in things like Infinite, eventually you're going to run out of units to upgrade, and you're going to have extra money. And Yoshino and Charmy especially, you can upgrade them. So with Amelia, if you get perfect SPA to slow people, she will lose that if you upgrade her more than like once, I think. Charmy and Yoshino, how it works is they have a certain SPA, I think it's like 7.5 or 8, on upgrade 0. And then they go down, go down, and then their final like 2 upgrades or whatever, they go back up to 8. So if you get perfect SPA on upgrade 0, then their final upgrade will also have that. Now they only have like 40k damage or whatever, but that's not nothing. So it is relevant. But the SPA is the number one important thing there. But I think for the rest of that, it's um, pretty straightforward. Forcible, there's no ones here anymore. This is because if they're here, their damage isn't good enough to be in tier 2. Even the ones that are more like main DPSs, things like Issei, or I don't know, like where is he? There he is, Yamamoto. Like these guys are supposed to be main DPSs, but I wouldn't recommend relying on them for that because they're just a little too old. Bon is an exception here because he actually is really interesting because he's very greedy with stats. The better stats he has, the way better he gets. And he used to be very, very strong not that long ago. So if you like have a ton of rerolls, he can still be very strong, but still, anyone in tier 2 or above might just show it better, to be honest. Not anyone, but the ones in tier 2 and above, I would faster use trait rerolls and try to optimize them than I would Bond. But he is very powerful, and he was meta not that long ago. So he's a sort of exception where he's kind of like a 1.75 or something. Like you might be tempted. Um, but yeah. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will try to get back to you. Um, and if there's any units you're curious about, whether I missed them or not, feel free.